This is HOA Citation Circus. It started with a fence line and ended with a board meltdown. I am standing on my front lawn at 7 in the morning, holding a tape measure, and Sharon Hayes is screaming at me about a metal stake that I did not put there. She is waving a plastic evidence bag with a broken survey stake inside it like it is Exhibit A in a murder trial. The fine notice in her other hand says $2,000 for fraudulent compliance documentation. I moved to Madison 6 months ago for a logistics coordinator job that runs on deadlines, and I thought Briarstone Terrace Association would be the kind of quiet neighborhood where gray areas equal HOA power grabs. But I was wrong. Sharon is the records custodian, which means she controls every document, every meeting minute, and every compliance photo that goes into the file. She has red hair pulled into a bun, a white light jacket over a polo shirt, a blue visor, and a scarf that keeps flapping in the wind like a villain cape. Right now she is pointing at the utility stake in my yard and telling me I planted it to fake my fence setback measurement. I tell her the stake is from the utility company. She says prove it. I tell her I have the email thread. She says that is not the format the board accepts. I ask what format she wants. She says a notarized affidavit from the utility company with a sitemap cross-reference to the county plat. I tell her that is going to take 2 weeks. She smiles and says if you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. That is her catchphrase. She has said it twice already this month. Once when my neighbor asked for a grace period on a mailbox paint violation, and once when someone requested a hearing extension because their mother died. Sharon does not do grace periods. The fence issue started 3 weeks ago when I replaced my back fence. The old one was rotting and leaning, and the HOA rules say fences must be maintained in good repair. I pulled permits, hired a licensed contractor, and measured everything twice. The setback rule says 6 inches from the property line. I measured 6.2 inches to be safe. The contractor dug the post holes, poured the concrete, and installed the panels. 2 days later I got a violation notice saying the fence was too close to the line and I needed to move it or face fines. I went out with my tape measure and checked again. 6.2 inches. I took photos, printed them, and walked them over to Sharon's house. She was on her porch with a clipboard. She looked at my photos and said the board does not accept homeowner measurements. I asked why not. She said because homeowners lie. I asked what I needed to do to prove compliance. She said hire a licensed surveyor to provide a stamped site plan. I asked if that was in the rules. She said it is implied under the Enforcement Discretion Clause. I went home and read the Enforcement Discretion Clause. It says the board may request additional documentation at its discretion, but it does not say anything about surveyors. I called a surveyor anyway. The quote was $800 and 3 weeks lead time. I told Sharon that timeline. She said the fine starts accruing in 7 days at $50 per day. I did the math. By the time the surveyor finished, I would owe over $1,000 in fines on top of the survey cost. I told her that was impossible. She said I have done this before and people fold every time. That was her mistake, because I do not fold. I run logistics for a distribution company, which means I deal with carrier disputes, dock scheduling conflicts, and rate negotiations every single day. I know how to document a paper trail, and I know how to spot someone who is moving the goalposts. Sharon was moving the goalposts. The first notice said the fence was too close to the line. The second notice said I needed a surveyor. The third notice, which arrived 2 days later, said the fence height exceeded the maximum and I needed to lower it by 4 inches or remove it entirely. I went out and measured the height. 5 feet 11 inches. The rule says 6 feet maximum. I sent Sharon an email with photos and measurements. She replied saying the rule refers to finished height including post caps, and my post caps added 3 inches. I checked the post caps. They were decorative aluminum caps that sat flush with the top of the posts. They did not add height. I sent her another email with close-up photos. She replied saying the board interprets the rule to include any decorative element that extends above the top rail, and my caps qualified. I realized Sharon was not interested in compliance. She was interested in forcing me to spend money and time until I gave up or sold the house. I needed a plan, so I called my neighbor 2 doors down, a guy named Eric who had lived in Briarstone Terrace for 8 years. He answered on the second ring and said, "Welcome to the Sharon Show." I asked if he had dealt with her before. He said everyone has. He told me Sharon uses the records custodian role to stall and overcharge for documents, and she has a side hustle doing compliance inspections where she finds violations that do not exist, and then offers to waive them if you hire her preferred contractor. I asked if anyone had reported her. He said 2 people tried, and both got hit with retaliatory fines for unrelated violations. One guy had his car towed for parking in his own driveway overnight because Sharon claimed it violated the commercial vehicle rule. The car was a Honda Civic. I asked Eric if he had any proof. He said he saved screenshots of Sharon's posts and messages in the neighborhood group chat where she brags about enforcement wins. He offered to send them to me. I said yes. That night I got a folder of screenshots. Sharon had posted about forcing 3 homeowners to remove fences, 2 to repaint their houses, and 1 to tear down a shed that was 6 inches over the setback line. In one message she wrote that enforcement is about control. If you let people slide, they will take advantage. In another message she wrote that she enjoys making examples of people who think they are smarter than the rules. I saved everything to a cloud folder and started building a timeline. Sharon's first notice to me was dated April 7th. The contractor finished the fence on April 4th. That meant Sharon inspected my fence within 3 days of completion, which was unusually fast. I checked the HOA bylaws. Routine inspections happen quarterly, and the next one was not scheduled until June. Sharon had done a special inspection, which required board approval. I requested the meeting minutes from the March board meeting. Sharon replied saying minutes are available for $25 per meeting and I needed to submit a written request with a check. I submitted the request. 2 weeks later I got a 1-page summary that did not mention my fence or any special inspections. I realized Sharon was stonewalling the document request, so I went to the management company. Briarstone Terrace contracts with a regional HOA management firm called Northland Property Services. I called their main line and asked to speak to the supervisor. A woman named Michelle picked up. I explained the situation. Sharon had issued 3 contradictory notices, refused to accept my compliance proof, and charged me for meeting minutes that did not contain the information I requested. Michelle said she would look into it. 3 days later she called back and said Sharon had provided documentation showing the fence was non-compliant and the fines were valid. I asked to see the documentation. Michelle said it was internal board material and not available to homeowners under the bylaws. I told her that sounded illegal. She said if I wanted to dispute it, I could request an emergency hearing with the board. I said fine, I want an emergency hearing. The hearing was scheduled for May 2nd, which gave me 2 weeks to prepare. I used that time to gather everything: photos of the fence with measurements, the contractor's invoice showing permit numbers, the utility company email confirming the stake, Eric's screenshots of Sharon's group chat messages, and a printed timeline showing the contradictions in Sharon's notices. I also hired an attorney to review the bylaws and write a demand letter. The attorney said Sharon's enforcement was selective and retaliatory, and the board's refusal to provide meeting minutes violated Wisconsin open records law. The demand letter requested a full refund of fines, a written apology, and a no-contact directive barring Sharon from inspecting my property without board approval. I sent the letter certified mail. Sharon signed for it on April 28th. 2 days later I got a brand new fine notice saying my mailbox post was faded and needed repainting within 7 days or face a $500 fine. The mailbox post was painted 3 months ago and looked perfect. Sharon was escalating because she knew I was fighting back. I took photos of the mailbox and added them to my evidence folder. On May 2nd, I showed up at the emergency hearing with a 3-inch binder of documents. The hearing was held in the community center conference room, which smelled like coffee and old carpet. The board president, a retired insurance agent named Dale, sat at the head of the table with Sharon on his right and two other board members on his left. Dale opened the meeting by reading the complaint, homeowner dispute regarding fence compliance and fine assessment. He asked Sharon to present her case. Sharon stood up, pulled out a poster board with printed photos and said I had installed a fence that violated setback, height, and aesthetic standards, refused to cooperate with inspections, and submitted fraudulent compliance documentation. She pointed to the utility stake in one of the photos and said I had planted it to fake the setback measurement. Dale asked if I had a response. I stood up and said yes. I walked through the timeline showing the 3 contradictory notices, the refusal to accept my measurements, the demand for a surveyor that was not in the rules, and the retaliatory mailbox fine that appeared 2 days after I sent the demand letter. I showed Eric screenshots of Sharon's group chat messages where she bragged about enforcement wins. I showed the attorney's letter citing the open records violation. Then I said I had one more piece of evidence, but I was holding it for the right moment. I let her get the last word, because I wanted the last consequence. Dale asked Sharon if she had anything to add. Sharon smiled and said the board has full discretion under the bylaws, and if I did not like the enforcement I could move. That was when I pulled out the trump card. I opened the binder to a tab labeled Timeline Analysis and handed Dale a packet of printed emails with timestamps. I said Sharon claimed she inspected my fence on April 7th and found violations, but the email thread showed she had sent a pre-violation warning on April 3rd, 1 day before the contractor finished the fence. I said that meant Sharon had issued a violation notice for a fence that did not exist yet, which proved the inspection was pretextual and the violations were fabricated. Dale read the emails. His face changed. He looked at Sharon and asked if that was true. Sharon said the timestamps were wrong. I said the emails were from the HOA's own server and the timestamps were automatically generated. Dale asked Sharon to explain. Sharon said she must have made a clerical error. Dale said a clerical error does not explain issuing a violation for a fence that was not built yet. One of the other board members, a woman named Janet, said she wanted to see the utility company email about the stake. I handed her the printout. She read it and said the stake was installed by the utility company on March 15th for a fiber line project, which was 3 weeks before my fence project started. She looked at Sharon and said, "You told us he planted that stake." Sharon said she was acting on the information available at the time. Janet said the information was available, you just did not check. Dale said he was suspending the fines pending a full board review, and he wanted Sharon to provide all inspection records and meeting minutes for the past 6 months. Sharon said that was not necessary. Dale said it was absolutely necessary, and if she did not cooperate, he would refer the matter to the management company for an audit. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where the Karens get what they deserve. The meeting ended with Sharon storming out and slamming the door. Dale apologized to me and said the board would issue a written decision within 10 days. I thanked him and left. On my way to the parking lot, Eric caught up with me and said that was the best hearing he had ever seen. He said Sharon had been running the board like her personal fiefdom for 3 years, and no one had ever stood up to her with that level of documentation. I told him it was not over yet. Sharon was not the type to accept a loss quietly, and I expected retaliation. I was right. 2 days later, Sharon showed up at my front porch with an inspection crew in reflective vests. She said the board had authorized a full property compliance audit, and they needed access to my backyard. I asked to see the authorization. She said it was verbal. I said verbal authorizations are not valid under the bylaws, and I wanted written proof. She said if I did not cooperate, she would mark me as non-compliant and fine me for obstruction. I told her to leave my property. She said this is HOA common area. I said my front porch is not common area. She said the bylaws define common area as any space visible from the street. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said, "You are trespassing. I am asking you to leave, and if you do not leave, I will call the police." Sharon looked at the camera and said, "You are going to regret this." She turned and walked back to the street. The inspection crew followed her. One of them, a younger guy with a clipboard, shook his head and muttered something I could not hear. That afternoon I got a call from Michelle at the management company. She said Sharon had filed a complaint alleging I had threatened her and obstructed a lawful inspection. I told Michelle I had video proof that Sharon trespassed and lied about the authorization. Michelle said she would review the video. I sent her the file. 2 hours later she called back and said the inspection was not authorized, Sharon had acted outside her authority, and the management company was issuing a formal reprimand. I asked if that meant the fines were dropped. Michelle said the board was meeting on May 10th to vote on the final decision, and she recommended I attend. On May 10th I showed up early to the board meeting. The community center was packed. Half the neighborhood was there, including Eric and several other homeowners who had been fined by Sharon. Dale called the meeting to order and said the board had reviewed the evidence from the emergency hearing and the subsequent inspection incident. He said the board found that Sharon had acted in bad faith, issued fines without proper justification, and misrepresented facts to the board. He said the board was voting to rescind all fines against me, issue a formal apology, and require Sharon to undergo compliance training before resuming her duties as records custodian. Janet motioned to approve. The other board members seconded. Dale called for a vote. 3 in favor. Sharon abstained. Dale said motion carries. Sharon stood up and said, "This is ridiculous. I was enforcing the rules, and you are punishing me for doing my job." Dale said you were enforcing rules that do not exist, and you were doing it selectively to target homeowners you did not like. Sharon said that is not true. Janet said, "We have the screenshots, Sharon. We know what you posted in the group chat." Sharon said those messages were taken out of context. Dale said the context does not matter. The facts speak for themselves. He said the board was also voting to require actual evidence before fines, which meant no more violation notices without photos, measurements, and a clear rule citation. He said the motion was on the table. Janet motioned. The other board member seconded. 3 in favor. Sharon abstained. Dale said motion carries. After the meeting, 3 homeowners came up to me and thanked me for fighting back. One of them, a woman named Linda, said Sharon had fined her twice for the same mailbox violation and refused to acknowledge the repair. Another homeowner, a guy named Tom, said Sharon had threatened to tow his car for parking in his driveway during a family emergency. They both said they were planning to file formal complaints with the management company now that the board had established a paper trail. I told them to document everything and copy me on the emails. I wanted to make sure the management company saw the pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more homeowners filed complaints. Michelle at the management company called me and said the volume of complaints had triggered an internal audit. She said the auditors were reviewing all of Sharon's enforcement actions for the past 2 years, and they had found multiple instances of selective enforcement, improper fines, and document falsification. She said the management company was recommending Sharon be removed from the board. I asked what that process looked like. Michelle said the board could vote to remove her, or the homeowners could petition for a special election. I asked which was faster. Michelle said the board vote. I asked if the board had the votes. Michelle said she thought so. On June 1st, the board held a special meeting to vote on Sharon's removal. Sharon did not attend. Dale read the auditor's report, which detailed 12 separate violations of HOA bylaws and management company policy. The report recommended immediate removal and a referral to the state HOA oversight board for possible sanctions. Dale said the board had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the community, and Sharon's conduct had created legal and financial liability. He said the motion was on the table to remove Sharon Hayes from the board and revoke her records custodian role. Janet motioned. The other board member seconded. Dale called for a vote. 3 in favor. Sharon's seat was vacant. Dale said motion carries. Janet said she wanted to add a motion to issue a written apology to all affected homeowners and refund any fines collected under Sharon's enforcement. Dale said the motion was on the table. The other board member seconded. 3 in favor. Dale said motion carries. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the management company. It contained a formal apology, a check refunding all fines and document fees, and a written no-contact directive barring Sharon from inspecting my property or communicating with me except through the management company. The letter was signed by Michelle and countersigned by Dale. I framed it and hung it in my garage next to the fence permit. Sharon tried one last move. She went door to door in the neighborhood with a petition claiming the board had violated her due process rights and asking homeowners to sign a recall petition. I heard about it from Eric, who said Sharon knocked on his door and gave him a 10-minute speech about how I had lied to the board and manipulated the auditors. Eric told her he was not interested and closed the door. The next day, Linda called me and said Sharon had knocked on her door and accused me of fabricating the email timestamps. Linda told Sharon she had seen the evidence at the board meeting and it was clear Sharon had lied. Sharon called Linda a puppet and walked away. By the end of the week, Sharon had collected exactly 0 signatures. The petition died. On June 15th, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Someone had posted a video clip from the May 10th board meeting where Sharon said, "I have done this before and people fold every time." The clip had been edited to include screenshots of the auditor's report and the formal apology letter. The post had over 200 reactions and 60 comments, most of them calling for Sharon to leave the neighborhood. Sharon posted a reply saying the video was taken out of context and she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. No one responded. The next day, Sharon deleted her account and stopped attending board meetings. In July, the board held elections for Sharon's vacant seat. 2 candidates ran, a retired teacher named Susan and a software engineer named Mike. Susan won by a landslide. At her first meeting, Susan proposed a new policy requiring all enforcement actions to include a written justification, a photo, and a rule citation before any fine could be issued. The board voted unanimously in favor. Susan also proposed quarterly enforcement audits to ensure consistent application of the rules. The board voted unanimously in favor. Dale said the new policies would take effect immediately, and the board would publish a summary in the monthly newsletter. I ran into Sharon once more in August. I was at the hardware store buying mulch, and she was in the garden section looking at fence stain. She saw me and turned to walk the other way. I did not stop her. 2 weeks later, Eric told me Sharon had put her house on the market. The listing went live in September. The house sold in October for $20,000 under asking. Sharon moved out in November. I never saw her again. The fence is still standing. It measures exactly 6.2 inches from the property line, and the post caps are still flush with the top rail. Every time I walk past it, I think about Sharon's face when Dale read the email timestamps at the hearing. Her smug smile vanished when the room turned on her. The HOA votes to require actual evidence before fines now, and Sharon's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes as a cautionary example. I got a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive, and I did not have to break a single law to get it. The neighborhood is quieter now. Susan runs the records office with actual transparency. Fines are rare and always justified. The group chat is full of recipe swaps and garage sale announcements instead of enforcement horror stories. Eric still saves screenshots, just in case, but he has not needed them. Briarstone Terrace is the kind of place where gray areas equal HOA power grabs, but the board learned that power has limits when someone shows up with a 3-inch binder and a timeline that proves the enforcer is a liar. I still have the plastic evidence bag Sharon waved at me that morning. It is in my garage on a shelf next to the framed apology letter. I keep it as a reminder that when someone tells you they have done this before and people fold every time, sometimes the right move is to unfold the entire lie in front of a room full of witnesses. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.